It's on. Okay, I have pleasure in opening the council briefing of the 11th of June 2024 at 6 p.m. and welcome all those in attendance. The City of Vincent would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay our respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge that as the City of Vincent we have a role to play in working towards justice and reconciliation for First Nations people. I don't have any approved leaves of absence, but I do have an apology from Councillor Ashley Wallace. So are there any members of the public present who wish to speak? Thank you. Please come forward.
Thank you. Dudley Meyer Highgate. So the item I wish to speak on is 6.2, the stormwater policy. There's an attachment to this report which purports to be a tracked version of the policy. It's not. There's about 6 sentences which are common to the existing policy. This is more than an...
Sorry, do you mind, I'm keen to hear what you've got to say. Do you mind speaking up if that's okay? Thank you.
Okay. This is more than just an administrative problem. The policy, or the policy is misleading. Policy suggests that there's no change to the average recurrence interval, and that's wrong. There have been changes. The reality is the intervals are significantly changing from 1 in 5 to 1 in 20 for residential and 1 in 10 to 1 in 100 for commercial. Unfortunately, Councillor Wallace isn't here, but he could explain to you what that is. The suggestion is that that's to address more severe storms. That's a fallacy, and I'll address that in a moment. Some strange reason the staff have defined the average recurrence interval in terms of flooding. It should be in terms of rainfall and not flooding. I found a definition from an American legal site. That's the only way I could find how they got that. It should be based on rain events, because that doesn't vary with topography. You don't get different rain at the top of a hill and the bottom of a hill. And also the Bureau of Meteorology provides that rainfall data. I couldn't find anyone that provides flooding data. The argument that the intervals should change to reflect more intense storms is fallacious. If we have more intense storms, then the value of something like the 1 in 5 interval will just increase. So instead of being 50 mils, you'll get 70 mils in future. So you don't need to change the interval. You just need to recognise the value will change to represent more rain. There's also a claim that neighbouring local governments use higher values. So I thought I'd check that. Stirling does, but it only applies to situations where there may be problems brought on by local conditions like high water table or peaty soil. It doesn't apply across the board. So I think that's misleading. The other thing I discovered in Stirling's website is that they have a policy that deals with land under the care and control and management of the city, including car parks and public open spaces. And that policy also aims to ensure that runoff causes no flooding of roadways or damage to private property. The question is, why can Stirling do it but we can't? There's obviously a problem here. Ray, Steve and Suzanne could not make it this evening. They were keen to turn. Beatty Reserve has that problem. Stirling has a policy that deals with it. Vincent should also have a similar policy. So I'd ask Council to reject the policy as it stands and develop a policy on how the city will deal with stormwater originating on its own lands. The heritage policy 5.1, don't confuse heritage with character. Cultural heritage has a particular meaning and is governed by the Borough Charter. There's a myth that it costs more to maintain a heritage property, that maintenance costs are generally associated with age rather than heritage value. People have been benefiting from this, and I think it's a form of middle-class welfare that you should stamp out.
Could you wind up your comments, please?
I think heritage assistance should be governed by a clear policy and not just left to the whim of the staff who regularly change. If you don't insist on that, you're abrogating your responsibility. It doesn't have to be long or complicated, but there should be a policy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I advise that the item that you have spoken to, the 2 items you've spoken to, which is 6.2 and 5.1, will be brought forward on the agenda. And and there being no further questions, I close public question time at 6:04. Okay. Governance Manager, were any statements received?
Confirming that we have not received any statements prior to the meeting.
CEO, are there any declarations of interest?
None received for this evening, Mayor Simon.
Councillors, does anyone wish to declare a declaration of interest in relation to tonight's agenda? Okay, so I'm going to go around and see which items people wish to ask questions on. Councillor Warner, Councillor Wallace. Oh, sorry, not here. Councillor LaFontaine.
8.3, please.
That was 8.3. Yep. Councillor Castle.
7.4.
Councillor Greer.
5.2.
Councillor Alexander. Councillor Wolf. Councillor Hallett. Okay, I'll just quickly work out the order. Okay, so the first item that we're going to get to is 6.2, advertising of amended policy, stormwater drainage connections. Are there any questions from councillors? Councillor Warner.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, based on the comments from Dudley Meyer, is there anything misleading in this document that we need to be paying more attention to?
Through the chair, no, the document stipulates stormwater drainage connections, so it's managing external drainage connections into the city stormwater when developers request to do so.
Are there any further questions in relation to this item? Okay, moving on to 5.1. No sound on the stream, apparently. Indeed. I could, of course, use sign language, but that wouldn't help people who are vision impaired. Okay, we'll be loading a sound version afterwards. Okay, so 5.1, outcome of advertising, review of heritage management policies. Are there any questions in relation to this item? Councillor Wolf.
Thank you, Mayor. I was just hoping to work through a couple of the suggestions made by Dudley tonight and then also via email. So one of the questions around this one was the submissions received. We've received a summary of those submissions in the document. I was just hoping to clarify, please, what our regular practice is around submissions for planning policy matters and if there's anything that governs how those submissions are presented. Thanks.
Through you, Mayor Simon, the city has two policies that talk about how it would deal with submissions, both the policy review and development policy and our community and stakeholder engagement policies outline that when we receive submissions, they would be summarised and administration's response would be provided in the report to council.
Thank you. The other one was around financial assistance. The first suggestion was around the cost of maintenance for heritage properties being more related to the building's age rather than its status as a heritage building. Is there any comment around that, please?
For you, Mayor Simon, probably just a broad comment that the city, through its strategic community plan, identifies and celebrates its heritage buildings and the historical value that they contain. And so that's really what the intention of the Heritage Assistance Fund is to allow property owners to make sure those buildings are properly maintained and that heritage is conserved and celebrated. So.
Thank you. That's probably a good segue to the next question, which was if there was any comment around the suggestion that this type of funding should be means tested.
For you, Mayor Simon, no, so the city's practice in the past hasn't been to means test the particular contribution. The city's view has always been that it's not weighting one, heritage property above another. and that all heritage is important to be celebrated and conserved.
Are there any further questions in relation to this item? Councillor Hallett.
Just a slight follow-up to that in terms of, in the absence of grants, what are the mechanisms that the city takes to ensure that their heritage premises are maintained?
So through you, Mayor Simon, I guess in addition to the heritage grants, there is mechanisms through the city's planning scheme and the planning framework for conservation notices to be issued if we identify that heritage buildings are not being properly maintained. That would really be the key lever in that sense.
Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. I've also got a question about the heritage assistance. So we're proposing here to revoke the policy 7.6.9. And I'm just wondering if you could outline whether the concept of provision of heritage assistance is enshrined in another policy or document that we have.
Through you, Mayor Simon, we can provide some advice on that through the briefing notes.
Thank you. I guess what I'm trying to determine is if the only guarantee that that assistance will be provided is coming through the budget process and through the continuation of the grant program. And if those two things were not to continue, would that mean there was no requirement or no obligation or commitment from council to provide an heritage assistance fund? And if they are the only mechanisms for that, is there what council oversight is that beyond just the normal budget process?
We'll take that on notice.
Are there any further questions in relation to this item? I'm going to move on to the next item. So the next item then is 5.2, outcome of advertising and adoption of new healthy food and drink policy. Okay. So Councillor Greer.
Thanks, Mayor Simon. Thank you so much for presenting this updated policy. I had a comment on a question relating to the Cancer Council mentioned that the policy doesn't have any set targets around the availability of healthy food, and just wondering if you could speak to the decision not to include any targets in the policy.
Sure. Thanks for the question. Through you, Mayor Simon. We thought at this stage of its infancy in terms of the policy, it's the first opportunity the city's had to introduce something like this. We are including things like sponsorship, materials, marketing, to increase the reach of the policy. But we thought at this stage introducing targets is probably a little bit too narrow. The implementation plan will support the delivery of this policy that administration will follow. And through that implementation plan, the public health team will have some measurables within that plan. So whilst there are no targets within the policy itself, they will be met. The compliance, if you would like that word, with the policy will be measured by administration.
Excellent. So the kind of measures of success would be in the implementation plan. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. That was all.
Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. The answer to this might be the same as the previous question, but the policy mentions that promotion of unhealthy foods and drinks associated brands at city facilities will be discouraged. Just wondering, what does that actually look like in practice?
Sure. Through you, Mayor Simon. So I guess you could think about vending machines. We would discourage the use of brands that would be associated with unhealthy food and drink products, and we would encourage operators to review those brands when that opportunity presents itself and switch them out with materials or products that are healthy food and drink products. That's actually already occurred at the likes of Beatty Park. So that's one example of how marketing and materials can change.
So would you say the approach is that we're perhaps encouraging people to self-regulate, and if we get to a point where that's not happening, then the next iteration may include targets or other measures?
Sure. I think, the public health team will work with our operators. So this policy is really designed to influence areas where the city has control, some level of control, and therefore will be able to influence those environments in more of a way than environments outside in the community. So where we can influence that control, we will be doing so. So for the likes of Beatty Park and in terms of their contractual arrangements, when those come available or come due, we'll be looking at incorporating principles of this policy into those new contracts and tenders so that it's embedded into that before any new tenants, if all the existing tenants renew, things like that.
Okay, are there any further questions? Councillor Wolf.
Thank you, Mayor. It was great to see the Cancer Council's offering of further discussion and support in the implementation of the policy. I had a two-parter question on that. Firstly, what kind of support might be envisioned in implementation? And secondly, I was hoping if we could just get a broad indication of if we get this type of support from the Cancer Council in implementing other initiatives. So one that came to mind was the smoke-free town centres by way of example. Thanks.
Yes, through you, Mesmon. We certainly do. The Council has been a huge support to us for our Smoke-Free Town Centres initiative, and they have provided us, educational material, marketing material that we can then relay to our community. So I would expect the same would be for healthy food and drink, where they have that pre-existing material and or marketing opportunities. We can either support them in promoting that through our avenues, and they can assist us with providing that pre-existing material.
Okay, are there any further questions in relation to this item? Okay, moving on to the next item. That is 7.4, adoption of the annual budget. Councillor Castle, you had some questions.
Thank you, Mayor. Just got to find the document. Just a question whether we will be reviewing the LTFP this year as well?
Through you, Mesmon, that was adopted in the May meeting.
There you go. It's my old brain. So I also had a question about the interest rate that's applied to late payments, and that's set at 11%. I'm just wondering how we've landed on that.
Through you, Mesmon, so that's through the regs. The ESL portion, which comes from DFIS, they charge 11% penalty interest on any of those. So we generally just match that. So it's all consistent.
Thank you. And I had one more. I've just got to find it. There's a mention in relation to the waiver of rates for community and sporting groups that it's a revaluation year and we've not received updated GRV. Could you just give me some more information? I think we were in a GRV year this year.
Yeah, through your Mesmon. Yes, that's correct. I think it's more in the context if there was an interim adjustment that came through and that rates were being higher than it currently is, we just allow for a bit in the budget for that. So,
thank you.
Are there any further questions? Councillor Hallett.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Just in relationship to, there was that recent funding announcement around Leederville Oval, and I was looking through the capital works, and it might not be covered with this, but it was the surface reconstruction wasn't until 26-27. Has this been revised in light of that announcement?
Thank you, through the chair. The city is currently assessing timeframes that will need to apply in respect to meeting or addressing the works that the grant is proposing, which is ground reconstruction and installation replacement of lighting. We're working on that. Once we understand when we might be able to deliver it practically, we'll go through a budget review process and an adjustment to the capital works program to suit.
Are there any further questions in relation to this item? Okay, so then I'll move it on to the next item, which is 8.3. Information bulletin, and Councillor LaFontaine, you had some questions.
Thank you, Ms. Amon. Yes, my question's regarding the updates on the bike network plan. I was just wondering, with administration concluding the 100% design of the Norfolk Safe Active Street, I think I I think it was over 2 years ago where the last workshop or community workshop was for that. So I was just wondering when the 100% design will go to the community for consultation. Happy to take that on notice.
So through the chair, so we just received last week the 100% design. The engineering team's doing up the consultation plan at the moment. It's worth noting that funding from the Department of Transport for the construction, which is to be staged over 2 staged construction phases, isn't funded. So there's no funding guaranteed yet. And the plan would come. The plan is to come back to council around October through a council workshop to brief them on the project at that stage moving forward in regards to construction. So the design will be completed around about October, and then we'll come back to council through a workshop to brief council on the 100% design.
Thank you.
Councillor Greer.
Thanks, Mayor Zaman. Again, on the bike plan of interest. So there's a few in there that have got a high priority and proposed to be completed by the end of 2025. I was wondering in the briefing notes if we were able to get any more information on those ones which have deemed high priority done by next year, just so we can get an update on if those are on track, given we haven't started them yet. I think it's number 9, 11, 17 as way of example.
Sure, yes, we can put that in the briefing notes.
Thank you.
Councillor Wolf.
Thank you, Mayor. I struggled to read the section on the public space open strategy update. I've had laser eye surgery, so I'm pretty sure it's not just me. I was hoping we could just get a clearer version, please, in the briefing. Thanks.
Councillor Hallett.
Thank you. And back to the bike plan and action number 2, which is the footpath upgrade program. Just wondering if in the briefing notes we can get a short projected timeline for the completion of that, because I think that was ongoing.
Sure, yes, we can put that in the briefing notes.
Okay, are there any further questions in relation to this item? Okay. I want to thank the public and the live stream viewers, and I close the meeting at 6:22. The live stream can now finish. Thank you. Is the live stream off? It is. Okay, I'd like to say how many you've all failed me by 8 minutes, and that is not